Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Today I have the pleasure of having a wonderful guest who is the host of LATINX America podcast. She is a wonderful individual and she tells her story from the very beginning, how she grew up and what the obstacles were that she had to overcome. I want to welcome Adriana Flores-Ragade, the host and founder of LATINX America podcast. Welcome, Adriana, to the show. Welcome back to the audience. Once again, Success Innovation. My name is Lázaro Herrera, and to everybody today, I have a special guest. Her name is Adriana Flores-Ragade. I am so happy and honored to have her on the show. She is the current host of LATINX America podcast. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Government and Spanish dual degree from Claremont McKenna College. She obtained a Master's in Communication Management from USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. She has worked at Univision, starting as an intern, also an engagement manager, social impact director, and freelance consultant. Most recently, she has devoted her time as the entrepreneur, being the host of LATINX America. Welcome, Adriana. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Lázaro, for the invitation to be part of your episode.
Yes, thank you so much for agreeing to being part of a Success Innovation episode. I would like to, get going and started with the question of what are your early beginnings like? Were you born in the U.S.? Did you grow up in the U.S.? And more importantly, how was your childhood?
Well, I didn't grow up in the U.S. I was born in Mexico. I was born in Puebla, but my parents raised me in the northern part of Mexico. So I was raised in Sonora. I came to the U.S. when I was 12. My parents had come before us. They had come many years before us, and we reunited with them when I was 12. So for a while, definitely over 5 years, I didn't see my mom. I didn't see my dad. So growing up with my grandma and my siblings was a little, it was different. So it made me appreciate the people that are around me. And it also gave me the opportunity to be resilient. And I see it as an opportunity because I could say, "Oh, pobrecita," I feel sorry for myself for not having had my mom for such a long time or be with my parents for such a long time. But my story is just like that of many immigrants that come to the U.S. and have to work really hard, and they have sacrifices. And one of the sacrifices that my parents made was to be away from their children. And for us, our sacrifice was to be away from our parents. But we finally reunited here in the US in 1986. And it was hard coming to the US because I had been a really good student in Mexico. And part of the reason why my parents came to the US was because they saw an opportunity and they knew that in Mexico we weren't going to have the same opportunities. Even after being good students and being good people, we were not going to have the opportunities to be as successful. And I'm really grateful that they took a chance and they came here because our story is very different than their story. And so we came to Orange County. So I grew up in Orange County the rest of my life, Orange County, California, in Buena Park. And I was an English language learner. So growing up as an English language learner, you have the barriers of language, poverty. I didn't know I was poor until I got to college and I got to see what everybody else drove. And I'm like, oh, I am poor. But I never felt poor because my parents gave us so much love. And they always said to us, if we're going to give you something, we're going to give you the opportunity to be something, to have an education. So they sacrificed a lot for us. So growing up, I didn't really have a normal childhood once we got to the U.S. Every spring break and winter break, every vacation we had, we would go and help my mom clean houses in Orange County and Irvine. And that was important in a way for us because we would help her, but we also got to see a different reality. It was good to see how other people lived, the opportunities that they had, what they drove, what they had access to. And that gave me the I would say the ganas, right? To want to do more, to want to achieve more, because I wanted to have that. I wanted my children eventually to have the same opportunities that I had, that I saw that the families that we was for had. And we've been very fortunate. So education was a stepping stone for us in terms of social mobility. And I was the first one to go to college. I was the first one to graduate from college. I was the first one in my family to have a master's degree. So my story has been a little different, or actually very different, drastically different from that of my parents, because they gave me that opportunity. They didn't put any limitations on me. They said, if you got into college, you work really hard, you make a decision, we trusted your decision. Because at that point, they didn't know the difference. I got into 9 different colleges that I applied to. And I went to the school that didn't have as much racial diversity. I went to Claremont McKenna College, and part of the reason why I went there was because I wanted to be a pace setter in that sense. People were discouraging me from attending Claremont McKenna, saying, "Oh, there's not that many Latinos there. You're gonna miss home. You're gonna move away. You're gonna live away from your parents." But for me, I felt at that time, and I still feel that way, that unless you take a new path, unless you force new opportunities for yourself and your community, you're going to get stuck.
Okay.
So going to MC gave me the opportunity to not only have an amazing education, because it's a great institution with a very solid academic offerings, but it also gave me the opportunity to see once again the various opportunities and access that my classmates had, and I wanted to have that too. So I had a great time at CMC. I put myself through college. My parents couldn't really afford, when you go to college and you can get a financial aid package, you have the student component, the parent component, and that you have either loans. Well, I was paying for both the student part and the parent part, and obviously I had some scholarships too, but I wanted to make sure that that my parents didn't have that burden of paying for me to go to college, because they couldn't afford it, even with the aid that we were getting. So I was working at a police department from 20 to 30 hours per week, putting myself through school. So I was going to school full time. I was living on campus. What I missed about college, and what I miss having actually at college, was a social life, because I was always working. Now, if I wasn't working, I was doing homework. And I think that's the only thing that if I could do something differently, I would go back and change that, because I think having the opportunity to meet different people, or having that experience on campus, that's what I miss. But I'm here now. I wouldn't change my life tremendously. I've had a really good, professional trajectory, and I think I've developed personally as well along the way. So, as a child of immigrants that came here, that worked really hard, I'm really proud to be where I am today.
Awesome. So that's a great backstory. I want to explore a little bit about when you were 12 and when you were crossing over, when you were coming over. Obviously, you didn't know the language. I'm assuming that's correct. So English was essentially a shocker. But you came to Orange County, over to Winter Park, and there's a lot of Latinos, a lot of Hispanic community there. But when you go to school, you obviously have to speak the English language. How did you cope with that? How did that happen?
So at that time in Orange County, and I'm not going to date myself in terms of when I went to school, but it was a while ago, and there were not as many Latinos in Orange County as there are
Okay.
now.
Okay.
So going to school and being one of a handful of students that spoke English was hard. I cried my first day of school. I didn't want to go back. I had been such a strong student in Mexico, and coming here and just hitting a wall and not knowing how to move forward. And my parents didn't speak English, so they couldn't help me. They could encourage me, but they couldn't really help me with my homework. So I cried, but I was fortunate enough to have 2 teachers that really took me under their wing. I had a teacher named Mrs. De Leon, who was our ESL teacher, English as a second language teacher. And then I had Mr. Wishick, my 6th grade teacher. So I cried, but then I got over it. And I was a really good athlete. So I started doing sports, and that's how I got this. I started connecting with my peers, and then I started learning English. And Mr. Wishick was very nurturing, and Mrs. De Leon was there teaching me Spanish. So I'm sorry, English. By the end of my first year, my teacher said, we can't let her go to middle school. So we need to talk to your parents because we think that you have the potential to learn English very fast because you're doing such a great job right now. But if you go to middle school, you're not going to have the same support system. So they held me back in sixth grade. So I did 2 years of sixth grade. And by the second grade, I was pretty fluent. So I learned the language in 2 years. And they skipped me to eighth grade. So I never went to seventh grade. They said, we don't want you to get lost. You're not going to have the same support systems. Plus, middle school, we all know middle school is the time when you're going through adolescence, you have insecurities, you're going through a lot of different things during middle school. So they didn't want to lose me, and they didn't want me to be a statistic. So they advocated for me, and my parents worked with them to make sure that I was up to speed by the time I left Beatty Elementary School, then went on to Buena Park Junior High, was there for a year. And after my year at the middle school, I had a great experience. Some of the friends that I have now are people that I knew from middle school that I'm still in contact with. And I went to high school, but there was a bridge program, and bridge programs are really important, especially for first generation um, English language learners, because between the summer of my eighth grade and the fall of the ninth grade, I did this summer school, this English bridge program, and I was doing so well that when they gave me the assessments that every ninth grader has to take to place into math and English when they get to high school, I did really well. That I was actually placed into the honors and AP track. So then once I was tracked, and that's why I think sometimes tracking helps certain students. It doesn't help all students, but it helped me because then I was tracked and I knew what classes to take and what to do in my 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. And I did really well in high school. I was a really good student. I did really well, not just inside of the classroom, but also outside of the classroom. And then you heard me say I went to CMC.
Right. So when you're already tracked, you're a ninth grader, you're good to go on certain things as far as school is concerned. How did you cope with, the difference from the school to your home to the type of students that were, the population in the school that maybe your other peers already had parents that were educated to a certain degree. They speak about college, universities, et cetera. And you go back home and you're like, okay, well, now we're going to go help clean this home at whatever location in Orange County. How is that contrast played in to your personal independence?
I think one of the things about immigrants is that we're very adaptable,
Okay.
and you adopt different personas in different places. So at home, I was a good student, and I wasn't cleaning houses every day. It was only
Mhm.
during the breaks that we had, the spring break, the fall break, I'm sorry, spring break, winter break, that we went to help my mom because they always felt it was really important for us to focus on school. The way I cope with relationships and getting involved and um, interacting with others at school was through sports and through extracurricular activities. So I was really involved in extracurricular activities. There was not a lunchtime that I did not have like a club meeting of some sort, right? So, which means that I was interacting with different peers from like the Key Club to the Community Service Club to, you know, you name it, I was involved in many different clubs. So that's how I kind of interacted. We never did the whole thing about, partying on weekends or Friday nights because usually we had my siblings and I were involved in sports. So we had either track meets or soccer matches or things going on during the weekend. So we were never really tempted to do other things during high school. So yeah, so I mean, it's balancing and understanding the environment that you're in. So at school, we were students and we were friends, and we were working with whoever was, whether it was in the classroom or outside of the classroom. We were working with teachers, we were counselors. I had an amazing counselor. Her name is Miss Martini, who I helped me and many of my peers actually get into college. She was working specifically with first generation students. And she left because the rich school in the district recruited her to go work for them.
See. Okay.
But before she left, she placed many of us in amazing places that we probably wouldn't have had the chance to go to. So yeah, so it's being adaptable and understanding that at the end of the day, you're working towards a purpose. And the purpose for me was to get an education. And once you're in those classes, once you're in the AP classes, once you are in honors classes, your teachers are guiding you, your peers are guiding you. Like they're talking to you about, oh, I took the SAT last Saturday, or I did this and I did that. And like I said, I had such an amazing counselor that she wouldn't have let me miss the opportunity to be college ready.
Okay, so you essentially had a mentor that kind of took you under her wing and guided you to the path of pursuing college. Was college education something that you were brought up with in your home, in your family, or was this something that kind of just happened because of the counselor that you just mentioned?
College, my parents didn't go to college. My mom had a second grade education, and my dad had like a sixth grade education. So they grew up in Mexico. My mom grew up in Durango, and she was orphaned when she was very young. She was 7 years old when her mother passed away and ended up at an orphanage. And my dad was a really good student, an amazing student. I mean, very sharp at math, but his parents needed him to work, so he ended up going to work. So he didn't have those opportunities yet. He knew, and my mom knew, that having an education was important. So for them, we didn't talk college because we didn't know college, but they knew that getting an education was important, and they emphasized that. And when we got home, there was always a cooked meal from either my grandma or my mom. My mom wouldn't miss a soccer game or a track meet. She was there. She cleaned houses, would come back right on time to make sure that she was there for our games. My dad was always working, so he did miss a lot of those things. But my mom, somebody was always there. Somebody was always present. And so the emphasis was not so much on you're going to go to college. It's more like we're going to give you opportunities that we didn't have by working really hard and sacrificing, and you will have opportunities. And that opportunity for me translated into going to college and having people that looked out after us. We were also really involved. My siblings and I were really involved with an explorer program, police explorer program. So growing up, I thought that I wanted to work for the FBI or wanted to work in law enforcement. So I was involved in the Buena Park Police Explorer Scout program. My brother was also, and my little sister, and that was also an extracurricular community service type of work, volunteer work, that also put us in a different path.
Fantastic. That's awesome. And then you decide to go to McKenna College and you decide to pursue a government and Spanish dual degree. How did you pick that degree and major? What drove you to government and dual Spanish as a major?
So when I got to CMC, I thought, because everyone else was talking about this, not because I had a passion for science, but I thought that I wanted to be a doctor because my friends
Okay.
wanted to be doctors, and doctors make money.
Mhm.
Um, but I got my first C ever my freshman year in college when I was taking calculus,
Okay.
and that devastated me. I was like, oh my God. And then I was taking bio classes, and I'm like, this is not for me. So within my first year, and the great thing about Claremont McKenna is that we took our general ed courses the first 2 years, and then we declare a major. So you were not like forced to declare a major right away.
Mm.
And it gave me an opportunity to explore different areas. So remember I mentioned that I thought I wanted to work for the FBI. So that's where the
Yes.
government major comes from, public
Mhm.
policy, understanding how different public service, what public service is all about. So that's where the government comes from. And also understanding more about the country that had embraced me, the country that I was now part of. And the Spanish portion is, and I tell this to people, it's like I speak Spanish, I can write Spanish, I'm fluent in Spanish. I wanted to have that same skill that I had or the same level of knowledge that I had with English. So if you have English majors, right?
Mhm.
Everybody here speaks English,
Right.
but they're at a different level. So for Spanish, it was important for me that I not only spoke the language, but that I was very literate on this language and that I was reading the amazing works of people that represented different countries and that represented the culture. So that
Okay.
was my dual major. It was not a double major, it was a dual major.
Okay. Dual major. Okay. Awesome. So during the transition that you were taking calculus, you get a C, and then you're in bio classes and you're like, oh my God, this is too overwhelming. You decide to go ahead and change your major. At that point, did you belong to any organizations, student organizations that kind of supported your efforts, that kind of made the college experience a little different and more bearable at the CMC?
So the beauty of the Claremont colleges is that you have 5 colleges across the street for one another. You have Claremont
Okay.
McKenna, Pitzer, Harvey Mudd, Scripps, and Pomona College. So even though I was part of this small campus with about 1,500 students, right across the street I had peers. So all the Latinos united from the different colleges, and we had a
Okay.
Chicano Latino Youth Center that
Mhm.
was run by Robert and Maria. And that's the the center where I had a connection, where I received the most support. Um, on my own campus, I was, as I mentioned, I was working like 20 to 30 hours a day off campus. So every single Saturday and every single Sunday, my mom would pick me up on Friday night and I would work 10 hours a day on Saturday, 10 hours a day on Sunday. And then she would drive me back with clean clothes because she would do my laundry and food so I could have some food for the week. And she would bring me back to campus, right? I was 45 minutes away from Winter Park. And I didn't really have that social life of doing things on the weekend, but during the week, I would go to the Chicano Latino Youth Center or Chicano Latino Center, and Robert Maria would be there for me. I also worked in admissions at Claremont McKenna
Mhm.
in the Office of Admissions. I was a cultural diversity intern, and I worked for the woman who recruited me to campus, Ana Fimbres Rafferty, and who eventually named her child after me, her name is Adriana, and now she's really big and old. So, I worked for Anna and Michael Smith, and they took me under their wing there when I was on campus, and I would help. I would do phonathons and recruit kids on campus. So that was my second job. So in addition to working at the police department, I was working at CMC and volunteering at CMC, and those are like my connections. And the reason why I wasn't as involved in other things was because I just didn't have time.
Right. No, it's fine. I understand. I understand. Totally understand. What would you say that, what would you say has helped you as far as any skills to be successful in college and to be able to graduate CMC within the time period that you did?
I think what really helped me was being humble enough to ask help when I needed it.
Okay.
There were great resources on campus, like the Writing Center, um, where I would go and they would look over my essays. The Chicano Latino Center also had services for students that they provided. So going there and having that emotional support, that guidance from Robert and Maria was important. So being humble enough to know when I needed help, and I had to ask for help. And then understanding my strengths, because when you go through a place that is not very diverse, it wasn't very diverse at that time, and not everybody looks like you, and some people had already taken the classes, had already read the books, they were so advanced because their schools had really prepared them. And not that my school didn't fully prepare me, but we didn't have the same access that my peers had. So understanding that even though you might have been behind in a few things, I still had strengths, and I still had a voice, and I still had something to bring to the table. That's what helped me get through. I knew that my goal was to graduate from college, and by the time I graduated from college, I graduated with honors. And I think a big part, once again, was understanding when I needed help and identifying people that could help me.
Fantastic, fantastic. Definitely being humble and being able to reach out and seek that help out, that really made a difference. So then you graduate, but before you graduate, you were an intern at the admissions office. Did you continue on in the admissions office once you graduated, or did you obtain a different job outside of the college?
So interesting question. So I graduated, and I thought that I wanted to be a teacher. So I went back to my elementary school. I went back to the school district where I went to school, and they interviewed me and they hired me as a substitute teacher.
Okay.
So I started subbing, and the admissions office also had a position open. So they invited me to apply. So I applied too. But in between the time I got the job and I started working as a sub teacher. So, and teachers are amazing, because I would get home, and this is as a 20-something-year-old, and I would be so drained just from being around like fourth graders that were almost as tall as me, right?
Right.
So when I got the call for the job at CMC, and they said they offer the position, I said, God bless you, teachers, but I'm going to go in the admission side, and I also had a chance to, I was still working at the police department too. So I still had that job in between. I kept that job for 4 years, and I didn't quit until I had my first my full-time job at Claremont McKenna. And I thought about going the law enforcement way and becoming a police officer, but I remember we arrested a woman who had shoplifted, a Latina woman, heavy set, that had shoplifted, and she had money in her pocket. So I couldn't understand why she had done what she did, but they wouldn't. Before you put a suspect in a cell, you have to check them, right? A police officer has to come, and they have to make sure they don't have anything else.
You got to pat them down.
Pat him down. Yes. I'm forgetting the terminology there. Yes, the pat him down. And because it was a female officer, a female had to be there. And I think I was in a ride along, or something was happening that day, but I think I was translating for her. But she had to go to the bathroom, and they couldn't let her go to the bathroom until someone patted down, and they were really busy. So I was in the room, and she just peed on herself. She urinated, right? She just relieved herself. And I was in shock, because to this day, I still remember the room and the scent, and and that's when I looked at her, and I was looking at a lot of people in my community coming through the doors there, not the right doors, the back doors, which is not where you want to come, right? And because I was translating at that time, they didn't have as many officers who spoke Spanish. And I considered my life, and I said, I either can go the route of education and where there's hope, or I can stay here where you're helping. Law enforcement officers are amazing. My brother's a police officer, but you're seeing the worst in people, whether because they're the victims or they're the perpetrators, right?
You're catching them at the bad end of
you're
right.
No esperanza. There's no hope sometimes for some of those people, right? Some of the people that you're seeing. So that's when I made a conscious decision of going into education, because there was hope, there was help, people, I was going to be making a difference in a different way. So.
Okay. Okay. So then you accept the position over in CMC, the McKenna College,
Mhm.
and that's the assistant dean of admissions and financial aid,
Oh,
correct?
I was an admission officer first, and then
Okay.
eventually I got promoted to becoming an assistant dean of admissions and financial aid.
Okay. How did that change your perspective from the contrast that you just mentioned to being the dean of admissions, where you actually can make a bigger difference by having and recruiting individuals and helping them financially to go ahead and pursue education?
Can we pause for a little bit?
Y-
So going in as a 23-year-old, starting to work at the Office of Admissions at CMC was life-changing. It was life-changing because I had been on a plane once before. I think for a sixth grade trip, which we went from Winter Park to Sacramento, Orange County to Sacramento, and that was like the first time that I got on a plane. But as a 23-year-old, I got to visit like over 20 plus states. So I was recruiting everywhere. It opened my eyes not only to different cultures within a state. I got to go to visit amazing schools that the students attended. So it's the perfect job for a 20 something year old because I was traveling everywhere. Um, Whereas at the police department, I was probably going to be going a certain route, working for one department, seeing the negative things in life. So the admissions world was probably one of the best jobs that I've had and that anyone could have when they're that young in their career.
Right, fantastic, fantastic. Yeah. Then you moved over from McKenna College. You went over to the nonprofit sector, to the Red Cross. What prompted that move to the Red Cross, which is a nonprofit organization?
I don't know if I would have done that again, looking back.
Okay.
And I love the Red Cross. My experience with the
Mhm.
Red Cross was great. But I actually fell in love and I moved up to the Bay Area. And
Oh,
that's one of the
okay.
jobs that I ended up getting. My husband, who then was my boyfriend and eventually became my fiance,
I
um,
see.
it was up here in the Bay Area. So I moved up here to the Bay Area. And uh, the Red Cross is such an amazing institution.
Okay.
But I ended up working for the Red Cross when 9/11 hit. And
Mm,
I was one of the first volunteers. There was a flight that left San Jose, California to New York City to help with disaster relief operations. And I was on that
mhm,
flight.
mhm,
As soon as the air ban was lifted, I was on that flight. And when I left, I wrote a letter to my husband, saying goodbye, saying I'm not sure if I'm going to be here in a few weeks because we didn't know what was going to happen. Remember,
mhm, mhm,
everybody thought that we might have a second attack. And when we were in New York, we kept getting alerts of like second attacks and things like that. So I left him a note, but and the reason why I joined the nonprofit sector and I stayed within the nonprofit sector because CMC is an academic institution that's still a
mhm,
nonprofit institution, right?
mhm,
I wanted to stay in a space where I could make a difference, where I would have an impact. And the Red Cross did afford me that opportunity to be of service to others, to create programs and services. And the reason why I said that I'm not sure if I would do it again was because when I moved up to the Bay Area, that's when like Google was opening its doors. That's when they
mhm,
had, you had a lot of innovation, a lot of tech companies, startups that were popping up. And hindsight's 2020, obviously, but I probably should have worked for like a Google or some of the other
mm,
tech companies. But for me, it was more like and I talked to my husband about this before taking the job with the Red Cross. It's like I want to work for a nonprofit because I want to make sure that I continue to make a difference in this space. And it turned out, that I worked with them for a few years and helped through 9/11. But after 9/11, a lot of the funds dried up because a lot of the money for the local chapter, for the Palo Alto area chapter, ended up going to New York for the
Okay.
disaster relief operations.
Okay.
So even though we had amazing ideas and we had great programs, we didn't really had the funds to carry them through. So an opportunity came up with the College Board from one of my,
Right.
and that's when I transitioned into working for the nonprofit organization where I spent over a decade.
Okay, so then you went over to the College Board and you ended up as a senior director of diversity initiatives there. So how did that, after you were in the Red Cross, how did you actually maneuver over, and how did you end up, more importantly, in the diversity initiatives?
So when I worked at CMC, I went to a workshop for admission officers.
Okay.
And there I met who has become my longtime mentor, friend, and role model. I met Mr. James Montoya, who is at the College Board. And Jim had a position open in his department, and he said, I can't interview you. He was working for the College Board at that point. He moved from working at Stanford. He was actually the dean of admissions at Stanford, and then became the vice provost at Stanford, and then transitioned to work for the College Board. And he said, I have a position open in San Jose, in our San Jose office. I can't interview you. I'll have my staff interview you. So I interviewed and I got hired, and it was supposed to be for like a year and a half long position, for a temporary position. And then I ended up there for about 11 years. But
Okay.
so partly it was because I was working on the rollout of the new SAT. I was working with higher education institutions all over the country, managing consultants all over the country, to try to make sure that institutions were ready for the rollout. And from becoming a manager of SAT outreach, one of the things that was really important to me was to connect with institutions and organizations that were serving underrepresented students, like the National Council of Raza at that point, which is Unidos US now. I was working with Aspira and all these great organizations that I had read about when I was taking Chicano Studies, one of my Chicano Studies classes at CMC, or actually at Pitzer College, because I could take classes somewhere else. So Pitzer. And I ended up partnering and working with this organization. So eventually, we had we had a realignment within the organization, and our president at that time created a new vision for the organization. And one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was on outreach, because I really enjoyed outreach, but outreach specifically to underserved communities. So that's where diversity initiatives became a priority for me. And also that's when I was able to align funds, so money and programs, to the work that I was doing at the College Board. So I worked with staff and our leadership, Peter Negroni, Jim Montoya. So Jim became my boss. Then he moved to New York. And I was working with them and I launched the first conference for Latinos. It's called Prepárate, Educating Latinos for the Future of America. And Prepárate was launched to serve educators who worked with Latino students. And we, as a national organization, we wanted to prevent, especially at that time, in I think it was 2000, mid 2000s, 2006, when the Latino population was booming everywhere and people were writing about it, and they were like in Georgia now, and they were in Nebraska, and they were in places that were not used to seeing Latinos. So we thought that it was a great opportunity to launch something, professional development opportunities for educators that were serving our community now. They were serving Latino students that maybe didn't really know, like, how do you communicate with parents? How do you, what are some of the best practices? So we really focused on the best practices. And from there, we came up with other programs. But that's how I ended up doing diversity initiatives. And by the time I left the College Board, I was a senior director of diversity initiatives. And the great thing about the work that I did is that some of it they're still doing that. They're still running Prepárate. And that is the biggest compliment that one can have when they're no longer at an institution.
Right. So you essentially left a legacy of sorts, and they're still running some sort of programs. Obviously, they've evolved to a certain extent, but they're still being implemented and they're still being worked on. And then off of that, you went into the communications. Obviously, your major is in government and dual language, but you're communications, and you got a position in Univision. How did that happen? You're in the sector of education, and all of a sudden you're over into the sector of communications in Univision. So, can you kind of walk me through that?
Sure. So my family grew up watching Univision. Like my
Mm-hmm.
grandma, she might not know, no, she didn't know English, but she knew when the financial aid deadlines were coming up. She knew everything that Jorge Ramos told her. She knew, and she would come and tell us about it, right?
Okay. Right.
Because she learned about it during the 6 o'clock news. So that's part of the reason that when I was in college, I actually interned for Univision,
Mm.
Channel 34 in LA. And I also interned for Canal 52, so Telemundo, Channel 52. So one summer was Univision, the other summer was Telemundo. So I always had this interest for the media world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I worked in admissions, I leveraged media. So whenever we had college fairs and different events, I would be the one to be interviewed, for in Spanish, so we could share information with the Latino community. So I had this interest, and then when I worked at the College Board, one of the strategic partnerships that I developed was with Univision. At that point, they were launching their Es el Momento campaign, which was a national initiative funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to try to increase the number of Latinos that were ready to go to college. And they did this through, massive campaigns that were aimed at parents, and some of them were aimed at students, but mostly Spanish-speaking parents, so they could understand how to get their kids college ready. So I partnered with Univision, and then when my time at the board ended, Univision, I had a great relationship with some of the staff at Univision, and an opportunity came up, and I was blessed and fortunate enough to then continue to work on some of the education-focused campaigns. But when I was at when I was at the College Board, and this is something that for young professionals, as you're growing in your career, you should always have this growth mindset, right? Not just, I'm going to make it to the next step. I'm going to be the director. I'm going to be the senior director. But how are you growing? What new knowledge are you getting? So College Board, one of the reasons why I actually accepted the position for SAT outreach was because they offer tuition remission, and I always wanted to get a master's.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time it was 2008, 2009, I decided to actually do it. I had been there for a while, and sometimes we kind of put our own dreams on we halt our own dreams because we want to help everybody else pursue their dreams. And I had been so focused on doing outreach and making sure that we were doing everything that we could to get kids to college, but I had put my aspirations and my goals on hold. So I decided to take advantage of the tuition remission that the College Board offered, and they actually helped pay for half of my master's of communications at USC. So I did that, and so I had this interest, and then when the time came, then it was an easier transition for me into the media space.
So when you actually took advantage of that stipend to go back and do your master's at USC, did you physically go to USC, or was this a long distance? Because at that point you were over at San Francisco Bay Area, right?
Yes, I was in the Bay Area. I
Okay.
was in Palo Alto or Mountain View at that point
Okay.
before I moved to Palo Alto. No, I did it online. It was an online program, and I highly recommend it for people that are professionals that are balancing having a life, having a work life, having a personal life, and trying to do school. When I got my acceptance letter, I was super excited about it.
Okay.
But I also found out that I was pregnant.
Oh,
So
was this your first child?
this was with my second child.
Second child.
This is
Okay.
with my son. This is with my
Okay.
son. So I have a 10-year-old and I have a 7-year-old.
Okay.
And I almost put that dream on pause again. I almost said no, I can wait and get my master's, at some other time. But I decided to just go ahead and do it. So I have an amazing partner, my husband, who took care of our toddler at that point while I was doing my online learning. And my classmates were just people in amazing, company working for amazing companies that were doing something similar. So I completed a lot of the things online, and there were opportunities for us to have face-to-face with our cohort.
Okay, so obviously we're doing this interview via Zoom, so it's essentially online communication, and that kind of is this what you used? What was the platform that you were using at that time?
We use Zoom at times, or we use a similar platform. But USC, especially online learning, they're way advanced. So they had a lot of great tools platforms that we used. I think they used Blackboard, but they used different tools. Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking is because a lot of people nowadays, especially in the 2020 year, we have been resorting to Zoom and to other online video chats and whatever. But you were doing this way before this ever happened. So, a shout out to you for actually doing that and being able to not put your dream on hold and to continue going forward and actually uh, being a role model for your family, your kids, and also for other individuals from Latinos that aspire to continue educating.
Thank you.
Then in 2018, you decide to become a social media entrepreneur, and you started being the host of the Latinx America. How did you decide to leave the corporate world and dedicate yourself and immerse yourself 100%, I'm assuming, into the Latinx America podcast?
So two things. In 2008, I'm sorry, when I had that transition, I thought about the fact that I had been living here in the Bay Area for 16 years or so, 17 years, and we were having a diversity issue. And every year when the companies put their reports out about the diversity numbers, they're super low. But we've had like a full generation of Latino students that have gone, Latino students, African American students that have gone through a schooling, yet they're not able to work for these tech companies. So I felt that was that in a way it's an injustice, and it's a missed opportunity for all of these different companies. So I wanted to really focus on inspiring the next generation, inspiring people that wanted to transition into the tech space. So having had different experiences at Univision and equipping myself with different tools and learning experiences on production, I leverage a lot of what I learned at Univision to kind of go for it and use new technology, because at that point there were some podcasts, but there were not as many podcasts as we have now, right? Especially, I think I just read something that in the past month they've like 50,000 more podcasts have launched since people have been indoors with COVID-19, right? So for me, it was looking at all of my life experiences and the focus on diversity and the focus on equity and what I held dear to my heart, where I wanted to look back, when I'm way old and I'm looking back at my life and where I had an impact. And this is where I wanted to have an impact. And I wanted to use a medium, which is podcasting, to have that kind of impact.
So you obviously are very eloquent and you have a background in communications. You worked in Univision, so you know what type of questions to ask, how to pursue a lead, how to go ahead and get the host or the guest to actually answer certain questions and dig a little deeper into their life. What is the biggest challenge from your point as to opening your first podcast episode? And from the idea of I'm going to be a podcast host to actually having it launch, how did that effort go about? Because that is essentially a business model that you have to put together. And it's not just you're interviewing people, well, you have to launch it now as a business platform.
Well, remember, one of the things that I mentioned before was being humble enough to know when you need help and being resourceful enough to find that help in some way. So I had a friend that at that point, Maima Rafael, who's now at Facebook, leading a lot of their content strategies, and she's amazing. She was working for Castbox, and that's an app and another distribution channel, right, for podcasts. And we were talking, and she said, Adriana, I think you should launch your own podcast. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how, I don't know how to launch my own podcast. Yes, I have a lot to say, but I don't know how to do it. So she actually sent me a link to Podcast Movement. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Podcast Movement, but everybody that wants to launch a podcast should know what podcast movement is all about. Podcast Movement is an organization led by Dan Franks and Jared Easley, and they work with in the podcasting space, and they work with a lot of partners, and they have what it's called a 30-day challenge. So a 28 or 30-day challenge where you where they walk you through every single day. You have homework, you have you look at mics, you look at the technology, you look at how to interview people. They give you curriculum. They give you a curriculum, and it's a self-paced curriculum. So every day you're responsible for something, but they're not going to be saying, they're not going to chastise you or get mad at you if you don't do it. But if you're really interested in doing it, you do it. So I did that, and after 28 days, I was ready to launch my podcast. So for me, it was more of having someone guide me through the steps. And was it perfect? No, but it allowed me to find resources and to have the content knowledge that I needed to get it done. So for someone that is starting and that is questioning himself or herself, is you're always going to question. At the beginning, I wanted to make sure I had no ums. There were no ums, right? So I edited every single out. But now it's, sometimes it flows. Sometimes the or the Spanish word comes out and it's okay. Right. I think it was not until my 7th episode or something when I interviewed Hector Mojica from Google, where I actually felt really comfortable to laugh out loud and be myself. Okay. So now I it's not a talk show type of podcast. It's a conversation. Right. They're good conversations, but they're not about me. So I tried not to inject a lot about me. I let the guests really talk about their stories, but I'm not as I'm not as self-conscious as I was when I started at the beginning. So for someone that's just thinking about it, just do it. And yes, maybe your first few episodes are not going to be like something that you're gonna that you'll look back, but they're the experiences that are going to help you grow.
So you've been doing this for about a year and a half, 2 years now.
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. Okay. And from what I understand, you've grown, you've gotten better at doing it, more confident with the experience that you've acquired. What has been the biggest surprise that being the host of your own podcast and essentially your own boss has brought to your life that you never expected it to do?
So one of the things that I value, actually, the thing that I value the most at this point in my life is my family. Okay. And having my family be part of what I'm doing is really important. So I was podcasting at an event, LTX Fest, that the Cape Center Latinas in Tech and the Latino Community Foundation launched. And I was able to take my daughter and her little friend, and they were sitting in the audience, and everyone there, it's like in their 20s or they're mid-level professionals, and they're listening to like inspiring speakers. And then we got to meet the guy from the Warriors, and then just having my daughter sit there and listen to this amazing advice from some of the young leaders in this space, and for her to take notes and understand the priority of becoming the person that eventually will be on that stage. That is just the amount of joy, the amount of value that I think that brings to the table is I can't put a value to it, actually. So for me, it's being able to mix what I love, the impact that I want to have on others, the impact that I want to leave, and being able to have my family be part of it has been really important and unexpected.
Right. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I definitely can resonate and um, relate to that piece of advice or comment, because my son, when I do the live episodes, he's the one that goes with me, and we set up the camera, the tripod. He's the one that makes sure that the mics are connected, that he does a sound check, and he's helping me quite a lot. So, and he's 13 years old at the moment. So I'm showing him by experience as to how he can definitely do stuff and pursue whatever he wants and whatever he sets his mind to. So thank you for sharing that with me. That's amazing. That's awesome. I know that you've also been recently invited to join the advisory board for Squadcast.fm. How is that coming along? Was that something that was long in the works? Can you kind of share with me a little bit about what that might do for the podcast and you as an individual?
Sure. So when I joined podcasting a couple of years ago, I think I mentioned my podcast was a winner from that 28-day challenge with Podcast Movement,
Okay.
and one of the prizes that I got was a scholarship to go to their first podcast movement in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And I got to meet a lot of different podcasters, and it was just an amazing experience. But there were not very many podcasters of color, and or people at startups or people at the exhibitors booth that looked like me or maybe had similar experiences as I did. So I actually found Zach and Rock. They were at that point, they were with Squadcast, of course. They had launched the company, and they were at the exhibit booth. So we started talking, and I started learning about the platform. Squadcast is a platform that you can use to record remote interviews, and it's extremely high quality audio that you get. They're working on the video portion, but right now it's studio quality type of audio that you get. So and not because I'm an advisor, but because I've been using them for the past 2 years. So when they've called me up, I connected them with different people. So we connected because of the Latinx connection, right? There were 2 Latinx founders that were there, and I was really excited. And then I started using their product, and I love the product. 95% of my interviews I recorded on Squadcast. I was using Zoom before, but Zoom didn't work out for me as well. And just the quality of the recordings in Squadcast, and also just the experience of using the platform, the ease of experience using the platform was just great. So I've been helping them connect with different people for the past couple of years, and then they came up to me late last year, and they asked if I would be interested in having more of a formal role in advising them. And I thought about it, and I'm invited to join different boards, but I don't accept all of the invitations because of my priorities and time commitments and things like that. But I believe so much in their product, and I believe so much in them and the startup and Squadcast as a company that I accepted the invitation, and I'm now one of the advisors for Squadcast FM. And in addition to some amazing people that are part of the board as well, like Harry Duran and Esprit de Boda and Pat Flynn. These are Jordan, big names in the podcasting world. So I'm just grateful and blessed. And if you're podcasting, and if you care about the audio quality as much as I do, I encourage you to try it. If you use the code Latinx USA, you will get a discount on your first month. So you get it for $10 as opposed to 20,
fantastic.
and you can do a free 7-day trial. But
Okay.
it's been a good experience. But once again, that connection began 2 years ago. It's not like they just came out of nowhere and said, we want you to join us. It's something that we built over the years.
That's a good point. You gotta nurture your connections, your relationships, and networking part of it. And nothing comes overnight. So everything that you see as a success today has been in development and works for a while in the background. So you got to make sure that you put the work in there and make sure that you follow through on certain things and are on top of it. So thank you so much. Awesome. What are the next steps for Adriana? What are you thinking? What's your plan? Are you going to continue with Latinx? You obviously have some advisory board positions that you're being invited to, but what is your long-term vision?
So my long term, it's funny that you asked because I just had I've been launching some partnerships, some strategic partnerships
Okay.
with Latinx America. One of them I just announced yesterday is a partnership with the Angel Capital Association,
Right.
and that's we're going to be highlighting a lot of different VCs and angel investors, and I'm trying to change the narrative for our community one story at a time. And when I say I'm trying to change the narrative, is many of us grew up not knowing about angel investing, not knowing about VCs, not knowing about startups. So I'm trying to change that. And so for me, in terms of long-term goals with Latinx America, I'm actually working on developing a nonprofit that will help target middle school students with curriculum
Fantastic.
that curriculum developed from the different interviews, experiences of our guests, because of the fact that we know that during middle school, students are thinking about whether or not they're college material. That's when but they're also building foundational skills that they will need if they want to join the tech space. So for me, I think that's a crucial time period for us to
Right.
get to our students. So I'm working on some curriculum. I've been working on a publication, which is more than likely it's going to be like an ebook.
Okay.
And I'm also working on some strategic partnerships as I work on launching a nonprofit.
And you're gonna roll that off in the San Francisco Bay Area initially?
No, the nonprofit, I think, will be nationwide.
Oh, nationwide. Okay.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
right off the bat, you're gonna go nationwide. Okay.
Yeah, I have the fortunate thing about having a network and having connections is that you partner with different organizations or different schools in different parts of the country, and I have different connections in different parts of the country. So I'm hoping to do some target markets where we could have an impact from the beginning. So yes, ideally we're going to do some things here in our backyard, but there are other places that might need it more.
I see. Okay, fantastic. And do you have an estimated date for the launch of this nonprofit org, or you just don't want to
Within the
venture into
next
that?
year. Let's just say within
Okay,
the
all right.
next year. Right now we're all
Okay,
quarantined.
all right.
people are not thinking about certain things. So
Understood.
within the next year. And
Okay.
yeah. So that's the long-term plan right now.
Okay, fantastic. A couple more questions. Good leaders always create good leaders. You mentioned that you have a mentor, but can you share with us any more mentors that you might have and what pieces of advice they might have shared with you that have made you successful?
Sure. So I mentioned Jim
Hmm.
Montoya, who's at the College Board, and he always said, treat other people the way you want to be treated. Don't stop learning. That's really important for you to learn. And um, he's so political in many different ways. He's such a role model. Like he doesn't let things ruffle to him. So being able to kind of control, because at the end of the day, you want to have the impact that you want to have, but you have to bring different stakeholders to the table that might not view things the same way. So always being a savvy communicator is important too. Um, the other person that I would mention as a mentor, um, sometimes young people can be your mentors. You don't have
Hmm.
it's not an age thing, So someone that's much younger than you could be a mentor. And there are two young women. They're twins. They're called the Cybercode twins, America and her sister Penelope and Lopez. They're out of East LA. And every time I'm around them, I learn things from them. They're coding. They actually taught themselves really how to code. They're doing a lot of community work. They're really involved in the crypto space. So for them, it's like just try it. That's where I kind of get my free reign of like just try different things.
Right,
Um,
fantastic.
And then the last role model that I'm going to mention, it's not a professional role model, is my mom. My mom grew up really, in a really challenging situation. As I mentioned, she grew up in an orphanage, had me when she was, 19, 20. And despite all of the hardships that she's had in her life, because she grew up cleaning houses. Actually, she grew up as not grew up, sorry. She was a nanny. So many times she was a live-in nanny. So when we were not here, she was living in with families. But when we got here, she was still a live-in nanny for a while. But she didn't let all of the negative experiences in her life prevent her from doing more. So she eventually became a certified nurse's assistant and is working now in a pediatric unit at a hospital helping kids that are, most of them are wards of the state. So from her is she had a second grade education, but that did not stop her from moving forward. So from her is being resilient and always looking at life positively, because we, especially right now, you can take a look at life and you can say, oh my God, I'm stuck in here, not working, or things are not happening, my kids are in the background when I'm trying to record. You can look at all of the different, like the negative things in life. But then when you flip it and you think about it, we're blessed that we have food. We're blessed that we have a job. We're blessed that our kids are here and they're healthy, and that we're watching them grow for the next, we've been watching them grow for the past month. So thinking about life as having a glass full as opposed to focusing on the negativity.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And you're so true. You got to be grateful for what you have, for every single day that you get to live with your family, with your loved ones. And what you do today will definitely reflect on what happens tomorrow. What superpower do you have? Or if you don't think that you have one, which one would you select and why?
Superpower, huh? I
Hmm.
think my superpower is that I'm a connector.
Okay.
Like I've I have people from all kinds of walks of in life, that have come into my life along the way, and some of them have opened amazing opportunities for me, and in exchange, I've opened doors for different people. So being a connector really allows you to not only feel the impact that of things that others are doing for you, but to have the ability to do the same for others.
Fantastic. Being a connector, that's an awesome superpower. Thank you for sharing that with me. Yes, I can definitely see that. Um, any particular book, movie, podcast that you believe has made an impact in your life to help you grow to the state that you're in, that you would definitely say, oh my God, I wish everybody else would take advantage of this, listen to, watch, or read, that you want to share with the audience and myself?
I think in terms of learning and growth, because I should mention, in addition to doing the podcast, I'm actually working on a second master's
Oh,
at
fantastic.
San Jose State. I'm working in a second master's counseling. And the reason why um, I think counseling is important is because I've seen a lot of the guests that come on the show, and we talk about this, where we grow up with a lot of trauma as a community.
Mm,
Sometimes, I remember growing up and being afraid of my dad getting deported. Eventually, we legalized our situation, but I was always afraid of that. I was afraid of, um, that my mom would get pulled over when she didn't have a driver's license. Some people grew up without parents because parents were working all the time, right? Like I said, I was fortunate my mom was there all the time and my grandma, but not everybody had it that way. So a lot of us have grown up with trauma in our lives. So I'm also working on some credentials for as a licensed clinical counseling practitioner, and I should be done with those in the next year or so, to try to help our community a little bit more on that aspect. So for me is I what I'm reading right now and things, I used to like Stephen Covey's um, the
Seven
habit. The seven
Habits of Successful People.
Seven Habits of Successful People is something I
Okay.
found valuable. I'm one of the books that I'm reading right now is um, the body has needs. So it's about how our body reacts to trauma, and how we might not think it's trauma, but it is, and how to really do a lot of self-care. So that's one of the books that I recommend. The other one, in terms of podcasts, I mean, I listen to different podcasts. Um, One of my good friends has a podcast that is similar in nature to mine, and it's called Latinos Tech. It's my friend Hugo Castellanos, and he has Conexiones, and he does it in Spanish too. And he's amazing. He's someone I feel like we kind of grown together in the podcasting space. So I listen to his show, and Squadcast also releases a podcast. So in terms of industry, I like to listen to their podcast to stay up to speed on what's happening within the industry and to listen to some amazing people. My favorite podcast when it comes to learning about the venture space startups is Masters of Scale with Reid Hoffman, and that one it you just kind of get exposed to like a different world in terms of startups and venture and everything else.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of those with me and the audience. Thank you. Uh, from growing up in Mexico, crossing over at the age of 12, living in Buena Park, and then going to McKenna College, and then working at Univision, Red Cross, the college board, being the admissions dean, and now doing your own podcast. You've succeeded, from my perspective, immensely. But to you and for us, what is your definition of success at this moment?
So that's a question that I asked myself when I transitioned into the podcasting space, and before I decided to pursue my second master's a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And for me, my definition of success is being happy, being healthy, and being of service to others. So I'm at a point in my career where I've done a lot of great things, and I'm happy. I know that I'm going to continue to do more and grow more. But at the end of the day, I want to focus on the things that make me happy, and having a balanced life, being able to spend time with my children, seeing them grow, and doing some of the things that I enjoy doing. That makes me happy, and I feel a level of success in doing that. Serving my community, being able to use my bilingual skills, being able to use the access to people, the access to networks that I have to empower my community, that makes me happy. So success to me is defined as being happy with where you are, and wanting to do more, wanting to grow. I feel that I'm at that point right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's an awesome definition of success. Thank you so much. This question, I really enjoyed it a lot. And it is, you came at the age of 12 and you crossed over into a different culture, different language, different nation. If you could go back in time to that 12-year-old young Adriana, and if you had about 2 minutes, what are the 3 pieces of advice that you would share with her in Spanish? Or, what would they be so that she could say, oh my God, I'm going to take those and I'm going to run with them?
Would you like me to say them in Spanish, or would you like me to say them in English?
Whichever way you like to say it.
So I'll say them in English, given that we're doing most of the interview in English, and I
Right.
can repeat them in Spanish. But I think what I would go back and tell myself is, don't sweat the small stuff.
Okay.
Because many times when you come and you're new to something, and you're considered a foreigner, then you become more self-conscious about everything that you do. So don't sweat the small stuff is the first thing. The second thing is, don't dwell on failures. And the reason why is because you can learn from failures, because a lot of the successful people that I know have had failure in their life. And I think many times we as a community, as the Latino community, we are so afraid to fail that we don't take chances that we could. And the third piece of advice goes along the same lines. It's like, take chances. The worst that could happen is you're going to fail, you're going to get up, dust off the stuff as needed, and then move forward. And the sooner you take chances, the younger you are when you take chances, the better it is. Because when you're an older professional, sometimes it's harder to take risks, especially when it comes to your professional journey. So take chances, take them often. And I would add something. Don't forget to save, because that little money that you save when you're in your 20s is going to multiply into a lot more money when you're an older professional.
Right. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing those key points with the younger 12-year-old Adriana and me and the audience. Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to commend you for taking the time and for making time for Success Innovation, to being a guest in this podcast, in this interview. Definitely learned a lot. I've enjoyed it myself. I hope the audience also learns and enjoys from Adriana Flores-Ragade and her experience growing up and getting a successful career in whatever she's done. Thank you. Lázaro Herrera from Success Innovation. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining me for another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. In this episode, we learn from Adriana Flores-Ragade what it is to be successful, the obstacles that you might encounter, and the fortune that you might have on how to turn a negative into a positive. I suggest you connect with Adriana Flores-Ragade, listen to her podcast, LATINX America, and reach out to her, making sure that you connect with her. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Lázaro Herrera from Success Innovation. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.